Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
Today we're looking at a stack of source material that honestly feels like a major leap. We're talking about something called Evolvable AI, or EAI.
That's right.
And the core idea here, laid out in the research, isn't just, faster AI. It's AI that acts more like biological evolution. Systems that are actually designed to continuously learn, adapt, and even, self-correct their own structure in real time.
Yeah, the self-correction is key.
And this isn't just for one niche area. It spans everything. Health, society, economics, education, all of it. It feels less like better machine learning and more like, intelligence that actually grows and changes itself.
And that biological analogy, it's not just a metaphor. It's fundamental to understanding. Think about traditional AI, let's call it TAI.
Yeah.
It can be incredibly optimized, like you said, maybe like a reptile, really good at its specific thing.
Okay.
But if you want it to learn something fundamentally new or change its core approach, you need this massive, complex, really energy-hungry process, a full retraining cycle.
Learn it from scratch, almost.
Yeah, pretty much. So our mission today really is to pull out the core ideas of EAI from these sources, to understand why it's, different, why it moves things forward. And the central concept that keeps coming up is creating these truly dynamic feedback loops.
Dynamic feedback loops, okay.
Yeah. TAI looks at static patterns, mostly, things that have happened, and it offers reactive solutions. EAI, though, it's engineered for dynamic pattern evolution. It's designed to spot patterns as they form, and that shifts us decisively from these static reactive systems towards something much more dynamic and, crucially, predictive.
Okay, let's pin down that definition then, because it's easy to hear AI that learns and just think of current machine learning. What makes EAI fundamentally different according to this research?
So the sources break it down into about 5 core operational ideas. First, it's got this continuous learning ability. It takes in new data and adapts without needing that whole giant retraining process every time.
Right, no massive reset needed.
Exactly. Second, it has to perform self-correction. When it spots an anomaly in a pattern or realizes its prediction was off, it adjusts itself.
It fixes its own mistakes, basically.
Yeah, or tries to.
Yeah.
Third, dynamic adaptation. It needs to adjust to its environment changing around it. Fourth, and this is the really tricky bit, technically, its own architecture evolves based on feedback. It literally changes its internal structure based on how well it's doing.
Wow, okay, that's a big one.
It is. And fifth, personalization. It has to tailor its predictions, its interventions to the specific needs of individuals or, whole groups.
So if we put TAI and EAI side by side, what are the big contrasts?
Well, TAI generally uses fixed algorithms, right? You design it, you train it, it runs. EAI, on the other hand, uses self-modifying algorithms. It can actually rewrite parts of its own code.
Seriously, it rewrites itself?
Within limits, yes.
Yeah.
Based on performance. Then TAI needs that periodic retraining, could be months, maybe a year.
Yeah.
EAI is all about continuous real-time learning, like 24/7 adaptation.
So always on, always learning.
Always learning. And TAI is great at static pattern recognition, spotting things it's seen before, identifying a cat in a photo, that kind of thing. EAI is focused on dynamic pattern evolution, recognizing patterns that are just starting to emerge, or maybe patterns that have never existed before.
So it's less what was that and more what's about to happen.
Exactly. Or even, how should I change myself to be ready for what might happen next?
That really frames the core difference.
Yeah, and the biggest leap, really, is that TAI gives you reactive responses. You get sick, it helps diagnose it. The economy dips, it analyzes why. EAI is built for predictive anticipation, spotting the subtle signs of that illness maybe 2 years before you even feel symptoms.
2 years, that's a huge shift from reaction to prediction.
Yeah.
Okay, so if EAI is going to pull off that kind of prediction, it can't just be looking at one thing in isolation, can it? It needs a much bigger view.
Absolutely not. It needs a holistic view. The research describes it as operating through 4 interconnected layers of pattern detection. Think of it like a constantly scanning 4-dimensional radar system for reality.
4 dimensions. Okay, let's unpack those. Layer 1.
Layer 1 is the immediate present. Layer 1, immediate pattern recognition. This is all about real-time data capture. Sensors, behaviors, communications, whatever's happening right now. And its main job is instant anomaly detection, spotting anything that deviates from what it knows is the normal baseline.
Okay, instant anomaly detection, but how is that different from just, say, a smoke alarm going off? What's an EAI-specific example?
Good question. A simple alert flags a single threshold, like high heart rate.
Yeah.
An EAI system using layer 1 is looking at the pattern of deviation. The sleep example in the source is perfect.
Ah, yes, the wearable device.
Right. It's not just that your heart rate is high. It detects a sudden, sustained, and significant change in heart rate variability, specifically during deep sleep, a time when your baseline is usually very stable.
Okay, so it knows the context deep sleep makes this deviation significant.
Exactly. That specific pattern flags a potential issue, like sleep apnea, way before you might notice symptoms. It allows for immediate feedback, maybe suggesting you see a specialist. It's reacting to the change in the rhythm within a specific context, not just a single data point crossing a line.
Got it. So layer 1 is the now. But just knowing something weird happened now isn't enough, right? You need history.
Precisely. That brings us to layer 2. Historical pattern analysis, this is the past. Layer 2 takes that real-time data from layer 1 and compares it against everything that's happened before. This is where it identifies cycles.
Cycles, like daily routines or?
Daily, weekly, seasonal, even generational shifts. It figures out if that anomaly from layer 1 is a genuine new deviation or if it's just part of a predictable up and down within a known cycle.
The education examples seem to fit here well.
It really does. So a teacher might see student engagement dip. A basic system flags low engagement, maybe sends an alert. An EAI, using layer 2, looks at this historical data and recognizes, student performance consistently drops in the 3 days leading up to major holidays. Every single time.
So it's not a crisis, it's just Tuesday before Thanksgiving break.
Exactly. It's not an anomaly needing a fix. It's a predictable cycle needing management. And once it knows that, the EAI can suggest practical things. Maybe adjust the curriculum pace for that week, schedule review sessions proactively, shift a test date. It takes the surprise out of it.
Right, makes sense. Okay, layer 1, now layer 2, past context. Layer 3 starts looking ahead, doesn't it? Predictive pattern projection.
Yes. This is where we move from recognition to forecasting. Layer 3 takes the current trends and the historical patterns and projects them forward. What's likely to happen next?
Is it just one prediction, like it will rain tomorrow?
No, it's more sophisticated.
Right.
It's about scenario modeling. Based on the current path, what are the multiple potential futures? It runs simulations. If we do intervention X, what does future A look like? If we do nothing, what about future B?
How far out can these projections realistically go? Does the research give a time frame?
It really depends on the domain. For something like traffic, maybe hours or a day, but for complex systems like community health, it could be projecting 5, maybe 10 years out.
Wow.
Yeah, the example given is taking city data current pollution levels, how easy it is to access healthy food, local exercise trends, and projecting those forward. It might predict a specific increase in, say, heart disease or certain cancers in a particular neighborhood by 2035.
And the point of that prediction is?
To allow preventative action now. Decision makers could use the EAI to virtually test interventions, like what happens if we build a new park here, or reroute traffic there, see the likely impact before spending millions on the ground.
That's incredibly powerful. But the real magic, I guess, and maybe the hardest part, has to be the next layer, layer 4, meta-pattern integration, this cross-domain synthesis idea.
This is the layer that really elevates EAI. It's where the system connects dots across completely different, seemingly unrelated areas, things a human analyst stuck in their silo might never link.
Because current AI is often stuck in its lane, right?
Yeah.
Health AI looks at health data. Economic AI looks at markets.
Exactly. They're domain specific. Layer 4 is about understanding how a pattern emerging in, say, the economy fundamentally shapes an outcome in education, which then impacts long-term health. It sees the system, not just the parts.
Can you walk us through that housing instability example again? How does it connect those dots?
Right. So the EAI isn't just seeing 3 separate problems. It's ingesting data streams from multiple domains simultaneously. It might track housing stability using metrics like eviction filings or how many families are using temporary shelters. That's economic data.
Okay.
Then it links that directly to educational data, maybe spotting increased student absence rates or measuring variable concentration levels in online learning platforms coming from the same geographic areas.
So connecting unstable housing to kids struggling in school.
Yes. And then it takes it a step further, linking both of those patterns to health data. Maybe it sees higher rates of childhood asthma or doctor visits related to stress, or even early indicators of high blood pressure in parents from those same areas, picked up from anonymized health records.
So the EAI concludes that housing instability isn't just an economic issue.
Correct. It sees it as a root cause, a systemic driver that predictably leads to negative educational and health outcomes down the line. It maps the causal chain across the domains rather than just seeing 3 separate crises in 3 different reports. And that kind of cross-domain synthesis is what you need to design interventions that actually fix the whole problem, not just patch up one symptom. So if we take that four-layer structure and apply it, the research shows EAI isn't just theory. It has really concrete applications across big societal areas. It's about moving from just watching things happen to taking personalized predictive action. Let's start with health patterns. Predictive intervention.
Yeah, you mentioned predictive health earlier. Current AI already does some health monitoring, fitness trackers, and so on. But EAI's promise seems to be establishing these truly personalized health baselines, right? Not just comparing you to an average.
Precisely. That's the core shift. Most current tech works off generalized norms, what's normal for a man your age or a woman with your background. EAI spends time learning your specific normal.
My unique rhythm.
Your unique everything, your sleep cycle variations, your typical stress hormone curve through the day, your baseline walking gait, how your energy levels naturally fluctuate. Once it establishes your unique baseline, then it focuses on predictive intervention. It looks for those subtle pre-symptomatic patterns that deviate from your normal, often long before you'd ever feel sick or get a clinical diagnosis.
The example they gave of the 45-year-old woman and insulin resistance really drives this home. It wasn't one big warning sign.
No, that's the key. It was a cluster of subtle deviations appearing together. The system learns her typical patterns over, say, 6 months. Then, maybe over just 2 weeks, it detects 4 small simultaneous shifts.
What were they again?
First, her blood glucose spikes started happening consistently about 30 minutes earlier after meals than her established baseline. Second, a gradual but steady rise in her nighttime cortisol levels, picked up maybe by a sensor. Third, her REM sleep, usually solid, started showing noticeable fragmentation. And fourth, a tiny, almost invisible change in her walking gait detected by her phone's motion sensors.
Individually, any doctor might dismiss those as just noise, right?
A bad week?
Stress.
Maybe. But the EAI sees the combination. It recognizes this specific 4-part pattern cluster as having a strong correlation in its vast database with the very early stages of insulin resistance. And crucially, this is potentially 2 years before she'd likely show obvious symptoms or get diagnosed with prediabetes in a clinic.
2 years lead time. Wow. And the action.
Immediate, personalized, and preventative. The EAI doesn't just say warning. It suggests specific, tailored actions. Maybe adjusting when she exercises to better manage glucose, introducing specific stress reduction techniques based on her cortisol pattern, targeted dietary tweaks. The goal is to actively disrupt that emerging negative pattern before it becomes a chronic disease.
It's incredible potential. But I have to bring up the flip side. The sources mention this risk of over-medicalization. If this thing is constantly watching for tiny deviations from my normal, couldn't that just make everyone incredibly anxious? Like health anxiety on steroids.
That is a huge and valid concern. It's a critical tension. You absolutely risk medicalizing normal, everyday biological fluctuations. A slightly off night's sleep, one indulgent meal. You don't want the system screaming, "Problem!" EAI design has to include sophisticated confidence calibration. It needs to distinguish between insignificant noise and a genuine, sustained pattern shift that warrants attention. It's a fine line to walk.
Yeah, a very fine line. Okay, let's shift gears to education patterns. Adaptive learning. Standard educational software tracks things like learning styles, maybe how long students take on problems. How does EAI go beyond that?
It moves from passive tracking to active, real-time system adjustment. The key is adaptive curriculum sequencing. It doesn't just follow a set lesson plan. It reorders the learning path, the content, the difficulty on the fly based on how that specific student is doing right now.
And it also integrates their emotional state. How does that work?
Yeah, emotional state integration. This could involve analyzing microexpressions via webcam, maybe posture, even response times, to gauge if a student is genuinely understanding something versus just memorizing it, or if they're getting frustrated or bored. If it detects confusion or frustration building, it doesn't just wait for the student to fail. It changes the teaching approach immediately. Different explanation, different media, different type of problem.
The example of the student struggling with fractions seems like a great illustration of that adaptability.
It was. The student gets division in theory, but fractions are like hitting a brick wall. The EAI dives into the student's learning history. It identifies a strong preference for kinesthetic, hands-on learning, and maybe good visual spatial skills.
So, knows how they learn best.
Right. So instead of just repeating the textbook explanation that failed, the EAI instantly adapts. It starts introducing fractions, using tangible things, cooking measurements, slicing a virtual pizza, analyzing sports statistics, things the student can interact with.
Making it concrete.
Exactly. And once that approach clicks, the EAI doesn't just stop there. It evolves its internal model for teaching that student. It learns, okay, for this student, bridging abstract concepts with real-world kinesthetic examples works best. And it proactively applies that method to upcoming topics like geometry or percentages, trying to head off future struggles.
So it's not just a tutor, it's a tutor that learns how to teach you specifically. It's fascinating. But again, the potential downsides are serious. The sources mention teacher de-skilling and losing something called productive struggle.
Yeah, those are real concerns. Productive struggle, that cognitive effort when you're wrestling with a tough concept, but eventually figure it out.
Yeah.
That's really important for building resilience and deep understanding. If EAI makes everything too easy, too seamless, do students miss out on that essential growth?
You don't build muscle if the weights are too light.
Kind of like that, yeah. The mitigation, the ideal use, is for EAI to identify the optimal challenge zone, the edge of a student's current ability, and keep them there, providing support, but not eliminating the struggle entirely. It's augmentation, not replacement.
Okay, next domain. Economic patterns. Crisis anticipation and inequality. This moves way beyond just watching stock market trends.
Oh yeah, much deeper. It focuses on two key areas. First, microeconomy prediction. This means understanding the financial vulnerability of specific groups or neighborhoods in near real time. Who is most at risk right now? Second, inequality pattern recognition. This is about using its cross-domain view to detect systemic biases in lending, hiring, housing access that might be invisible in aggregated data, or to human auditors looking at single factors.
Tell us about that city downturn example. How does EAI spot a systemic shift that traditional city analysts might miss by just looking at GDP or unemployment?
So traditional metrics are often lagging indicators. EAI is looking at a cluster of subtle leading indicators across different data streams in a specific city, maybe over 6 months. It sees things like a slow but steady decline in foot traffic at downtown restaurants, using anonymized location data perhaps. At the same time, it sees a statistically significant rise in the number of hours people aged, say 22-35, or working in the gig economy, from platform data. And alongside that, it detects a rising aggregate credit card debt-to-income ratio within that same demographic from financial data analysis.
So 3 separate trends. What's the EAI's synthesized conclusion? Why is it more than just a temporary slump?
It analyzes that specific combination of trends and concludes it's not just a cyclical downturn. It identifies it as a fundamental structural shift happening in the city's economy. Its hypothesis might be the increase in remote work is permanently reducing downtown commercial activity, which forces displaced service workers into less stable gig work to cover rising rents, creating a negative feedback loop that hurts local businesses dependent on daytime commuters.
So it sees the underlying cause and effect chain.
Exactly. Traditional analysis might flag 3 separate issues: declining retail, stressed workers, rising debt. EAI identifies a single, interconnected, cascading root pattern.
Which means the solution isn't just temporary relief.
Right. The predicted action isn't just, say, a small business grant program. It's more structural. The EAI might alert city planners to the need to rezone some commercial areas for residential use, suggest highly targeted job retraining programs for the specific workers identified as most vulnerable in the shift, and use its probability models to guide support towards businesses with a realistic chance of adapting to the new economic reality.
And the outcome predicted?
The model suggested that without intervention, maybe 30% of those downtown businesses would fail within 18 months. With the EAI-guided structural changes, the predicted failure rate drops to 12%. That's a concrete example of using system-level pattern recognition for preventative economic policy.
That really shows the potential value. Okay, finally, and this one feels maybe the most sensitive, political and social patterns, conflict prevention.
This is definitely high stakes. The idea here is for EAI to look beyond surface-level things like opinion polls. It's aiming for conflict pattern prediction, identifying the subtle precursors to social unrest or violence, and also misinformation pattern detection, tracking how false narratives spread and take root.
The example of the pre-fracture community pattern was chilling because it's about things falling apart before it gets obvious.
Yes, it focuses on detecting the erosion of social trust, the subtle signs before things escalate. In the hypothetical community A, the EAI observes several faint signals over, say, 18 months. Things like a noticeable decline in attendance at voluntary public meetings or town halls.
Okay, people disengaging.
Right. Also, a rising frequency of complaints about relatively minor but persistent local issues like noise ordinances, parking disputes, things that seem small but generate friction. Simultaneously, it detects the formation of new, highly exclusive online social media groups within the community with increasingly polarized language. And finally, a small but statistically significant uptick in low-level vandalism targeting public spaces, parks, bus stops.
Individually, none of those sound like a major crisis. Annoying, maybe, but not a sign of collapse.
Exactly. But the EAI cross-references this specific combination of factors against its historical database of thousands of communities worldwide. And it finds this exact pattern has preceded significant social conflict from sustained protests to localized violence in 847 similar cases.
Wow. What's the underlying connection it identifies?
The common thread, the meta-pattern EAI flags, is often a perceived lack of political efficacy. People feel ignored, like their voice doesn't matter in local decisions. That feeling drives them away from official channels and into echo chambers where these minor grievances get amplified and can become proxies for much deeper frustrations about fairness or identity.
And the suggested interventions are aimed at restoring that sense of agency.
Precisely. They're proactive and social, not reactive and policing-focused. Things like implementing participatory budgeting processes so residents have direct input on local spending, setting up structured, mediated dialogue forums between different community groups, and ensuring local government is hyper-transparent and responsive in addressing those initial, seemingly minor catalyzing issues like noise or parking to show that engagement actually leads to results. The goal is to rebuild trust and efficacy before the fracture becomes irreparable.
That preemptive social repair is fascinating. Before we move on, the research also touched on environmental and workplace applications, right? Briefly, how does EAI apply there?
Yeah, two good examples of the cross-domain power. The environmental patterns one involved the watershed. EAI detected a slow burn pattern cluster, a tiny, sustained increase in water temperature linked to a decline in specific aquatic insect populations, which then led to fewer fish and birds over a 5-year period.
Okay, a slow cascade.
Right. But the EAI's Layer 4 analysis connected this back to upstream changes, increased agricultural land use, which meant fewer trees along the riverbanks providing shade. It wasn't just climate change, it was a local land use pattern causing the warming. EAI projected a full ecosystem collapse within 8 years.
And the intervention?
Targeted reforestation along the critical stream sections, plus working with farmers to adjust water usage timing. The model showed this could preserve 80% of the ecosystem's health. It's seeing and correcting the problem before the river is visibly dead.
And the multi-generational workplace, managing different work styles.
This one recognizes that a lot of office friction isn't malice, it's just misaligned patterns. EAI observes communication preferences. Maybe Gen Z defaults to instant chat. Millennials like scheduled Zooms with pre-reads. Boomers prefer face-to-face discussions.
Sounds familiar.
Right. Instead of forcing everyone into one mold, EAI designs personalized communication protocols. It acts like a translator, suggesting the best way to approach a colleague based on their known patterns, maybe even adapting meeting formats dynamically. It also helps tailor feedback styles. The model predicted a potential 40% reduction in interpersonal conflict just by making these invisible patterns visible and suggesting adaptive strategies.
Okay, we've seen what EAI can potentially do across all these different areas, but now let's get into the really deep stuff. How does this system actually learn, and crucially, how does it police itself? It's not enough to find patterns. The sources say it needs to understand causality and fix its own flaws, especially bias.
Right, this is the engine under the hood. For EAI to evolve like this, it needs algorithmic approaches that go way beyond standard deep learning. The research points to 3 core technical capabilities driving its pattern recognition. First is temporal recognition.
Temporal, so time-related.
Exactly. This isn't just looking at data points, it's deep time series analysis. It identifies subtle rhythms, daily energy cycles, seasonal buying habits, even longer life stage transitions. But critically, it detects the rate of change, the acceleration or deceleration within those patterns. Is this trend speeding up exponentially, or is it slowing down and leveling off? Knowing the dynamics of change is key.
Okay, understanding the rhythm and speed of change, what's next?
This one is absolutely vital, causal pattern inference. This is the system's ability to figure out cause and effect, not just correlation. This is arguably what separates true EAI from just a sophisticated predictive model.
Because correlation isn't causation, the classic problem.
The classic problem. TAI can easily fall into that trap. The old example, ice cream sales go up, shark attacks go up. A naive system might conclude ice cream causes shark attacks.
Right. Ban Ben & Jerry's to save swimmers.
Exactly. EAI is designed to perform counterfactual reasoning. It asks what-if questions internally. Okay, both are rising, but what if we could magically make the weather cooler, reducing beach attendance, but kept ice cream sales high? Would shark attacks still rise? By running these kinds of virtual interventions and simulations, EAI can start to tease apart the real causal driver in this case, warm weather driving both beachgoing and ice cream consumption from the mere correlation.
So it can predict the likely effect if you actually did intervene.
Precisely. It moves beyond just observing A happened, then B happened, to understanding if A directly influences B and how much. That's essential for making interventions that actually work.
And the third capability ties back to layer 4, that cross-domain view.
Yes, meta-pattern recognition. This is the higher-order analysis. It's about detecting universal principles or shapes of patterns that recur across totally different domains.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, so EAI might recognize that the mathematical curve describing how quickly political polarization accelerates in online discussions, the rapid formation of distinct groups, and the sharp drop-off in cross-group interaction looks remarkably similar to the curve describing the collapse of certain fish populations when an ecosystem reaches a tipping point.
So it learns the shape of system breakdown.
It learns that structural failure, whether social or ecological, often follows similar underlying mathematical or dynamic patterns regardless of the specific content. It learns the abstract principles of system behavior.
That's quite a leap. Okay, so these three abilities, temporal, causal, meta, they feed into the core evolutionary process, the continuous learning architecture.
That's the heart of it. The whole system runs on this constant self-referential feedback loop. It's always cycling. New data comes in, patterns are detected, predictions are made. The system observes the actual outcome in the real world. It calculates the error, the gap between prediction and reality. That error signal drives a model update, maybe tweaking internal parameters, maybe even modifying a subroutine, which leads to refined predictions next time around.
And that loop never stops.
Never stops. It's learning and evolving its understanding of reality with every cycle, potentially moment by moment, without needing those massive offline retraining sessions.
Okay, but if it's constantly changing and learning from potentially messy real-world data, how do you ensure it doesn't go off the rails? How do you make it trustworthy, especially regarding fairness and bias? What are the self-correction mechanisms?
This is absolutely critical. It has to be built in from the start. The research highlights several key mechanisms. First, bias auditing. EAI isn't just trained once and hoped for the best. It includes internal processes that continuously monitor its own outputs for systematic errors that might be unfairly affecting specific demographic groups.
So it checks itself for prejudice.
Actively. For instance, if it inherited a bias from historical lending data that disadvantaged a certain neighborhood, the system wouldn't just flag it. It's designed to trigger an adaptation protocol. It would adjust its internal weightings, run counterfactual tests. Would this loan be approved if the only change was the zip code? Trying to ensure its decisions are based on relevant factors, not historical prejudice baked into the data.
That's impressive. It actively tries to debias itself. What about just missing things? Blind spots it hasn't encountered yet.
That's where adversarial testing comes in. This is like deliberately trying to break the system. You feed it weird edge cases, purposefully noisy or conflicting data, scenarios designed to push its logic to the limits. It's like stress testing a bridge. You want to find the weaknesses before it encounters something unexpected in the real world.
Trying to anticipate the unknown unknowns.
Sort of, yeah. Then there's confidence calibration. EAI doesn't just spit out an answer, it gives a confidence score with it. I predict X with 85% confidence. Crucially, that confidence level isn't static. It's constantly adjusted based on the system's actual track record in that specific type of prediction. If it's consistently wrong about, say, predicting election outcomes in a certain region, its confidence score for those predictions will automatically drop.
So it learns humility.
In a computation sense, yes. A low confidence score signals human oversight needed here.
And reality changes at different speeds, right? A market crash versus climate change, how does EAI handle that? The research mentioned different adaptation protocols.
Yeah, it needs different gears. It uses rapid adaptation for immediate short-term events, think hours or minutes. A sudden equipment failure alert, a traffic jam forming right now.
Right.
It needs to react fast.
Okay.
Then there's medium adaptation for trends emerging over days or weeks, like a sudden shift in consumer preference for a product or a localized disease outbreak starting.
Right.
And finally, gradual evolution is for the big, slow-moving paradigm shifts that happen over months, years, even decades. Things like society transitioning away from fossil fuels or adopting fundamentally new communication norms. The system needs to adapt its core assumptions more slowly and carefully for these long-term changes.
So it matches its learning speed to the speed of the change.
Exactly. And their sources also mention something called conservative anchoring, basically a built-in brake mechanism. It prevents the AI from overreacting wildly to just a temporary blip or noisy data point. It needs some stability, some resistance to chasing every momentary fluctuation. It has to balance responsiveness with stability. So, after laying all this out, the layers, the applications, the mechanics, it begs a really important question, doesn't it? Why do we even need this? We have brilliant scientists, powerful computers already. Why the push for EAI?
Yeah, what's the fundamental driver?
The argument in the research boils down to one thing: the sheer overwhelming cognitive complexity of modern life. It is simply scaled beyond an augmented human capacity.
This is the complexity crisis they talk about, and that stat is just mind-boggling. Humans process maybe 11 million bits of information per second through our senses, but our conscious awareness, what we can actually think about, is maybe only 50 bits per second.
It's a staggering difference. The world is throwing data and connections at us at an accelerating rate, and our fundamental processing power isn't keeping up.
And it's not just the volume of data, it's how interconnected everything is.
That's the other key piece: interconnection density. Almost any significant action you take in one area, personal health, economics, environment, immediately ripples out and affects multiple other domains in ways that are really hard to predict.
The example they used was simple but effective. Just deciding whether to drive or take public transit today.
Seems trivial, right? But a human probably weighs convenience, maybe cost, travel time.
Yeah, mostly personal factors.
An EAI system, using that layer 4 integration, is designed to model the whole complex web of consequences simultaneously. Your personal comfort, yes, but also your budget impact, the carbon emissions, the effect on local air quality, your potential exercise gain loss, your likely stress level based on real-time traffic forecasts, and the collective social cost of your car adding to congestion that slows down hundreds of other people.
No human brain can juggle all of that optimally for every decision.
Exactly. We just can't. We rely on heuristics, gut feelings, limited factors. EAI offers the potential to augment our decision-making by making those complex trade-offs visible and allowing us to optimize based on what we actually value.
And this overwhelming complexity naturally leads to the idea of the prevention paradigm,
Right.
moving away from just reacting to problems.
Yes. Our current default mode across almost all sectors is reactive. We treat diseases after they're diagnosed. We implement economic stimulus after a recession hits. We send peacekeepers after violence breaks out. It's costly, it's inefficient, and there's immense suffering baked into that reactive model.
Whereas EAI promises intervention much earlier.
At the pattern emergence point, intervening when the subtle signs first appear before the full-blown crisis manifests, preventing the disease pre-symptomatically, smoothing economic transitions before they become downturns, de-escalating social tensions before they ignite.
Let's just pause on the economic argument for prevention, especially in healthcare. The numbers cited are just enormous.
They really are. The research points out that the U.S. healthcare system, largely reactive, costs something like $3.8 trillion a year. And the vast majority of that is spent managing chronic, often preventable diseases.
Diseases of lifestyle, mostly.
Largely. The EAI models discussed in the sources suggest that effective, personalized predictive intervention could potentially lead to a 40 to 60% reduction in the overall burden of chronic disease.
40 to 60%, that translates to.
Potential annual savings of anywhere from $1.5 trillion to $2.3 trillion, just in the U.S. That's not just tweaking the system, that's a fundamental restructuring of national expenditure and, more importantly, human well-being. The scale is immense.
Okay, the potential benefits are huge. The necessity seems clear, given the complexity. But it still sounds a bit like EAI is going to run everything. The research seems very careful to frame this as augmentation, not replacement.
That distinction is absolutely crucial, and the developers seem acutely aware of it. EAI isn't designed to replace human judgment or decision-making. It's designed to augment it in specific ways where humans struggle.
What are those key augmentation areas?
4 main ones come through. 1, detecting complex patterns in vast data sets that humans would simply miss. 2, simulating thousands of possible future scenarios almost instantly to show potential consequences of actions. 3, helping us identify our own systematic cognitive biases that cloud our judgment. And 4, finding potentially optimal pathways or solutions in systems so complex they're beyond human intuition or visualization. It gives you the map, the forecast, the risk assessment.
So it handles the heavy lifting on data and complexity. But what uniquely human strengths do we need to preserve and focus on if EAI takes care of optimization?
This is where our role becomes even more critical. We retain responsibility for the things EAI can't do or shouldn't do, like values determination, deciding what outcomes we actually want to optimize for. Is it pure efficiency or equity? Economic growth or environmental sustainability? Those are human value judgments.
Right, the should question.
Exactly. Also, ethical judgment. Discerning right from wrong, especially in ambiguous situations where the optimal path might be ethically questionable. Then there's creative synthesis, genuine innovation, empathy, understanding context, making meaning out of it all. EAI can be an incredibly powerful tool for achieving goals. But humans must remain the ones setting the goals and ensuring the process aligns with our values. We're the moral compass and the source of true novelty.
Which brings us squarely to the biggest challenge, maybe, the reliability question. How much can we actually trust a system that's constantly learning and changing itself?
The research is refreshingly honest here. It assesses EAI as conditionally reliable, meaning its reliability varies greatly depending on the context.
Where is it most reliable?
It tends to be highly reliable in well-defined systems where there's clear data and rapid, unambiguous feedback. Things like diagnosing certain diseases from medical images, predicting when a machine component is likely to fail based on sensor data, or making short-term forecasts for things like traffic or weather. The feedback loop is tight. It quickly learns if it was right or wrong.
And where does its reliability drop off?
It becomes less reliable in domains that are inherently fuzzy, subjective, have very long feedback loops, or involve complex human factors. Things like making nuanced ethical judgments, predicting long-term social trends, defining meaning or purpose, generating truly groundbreaking creative ideas, or answering deep existential questions.
So that creates a real paradox, doesn't
A
it?
huge paradox. EAI is most trustworthy and reliable in situations where the stakes are relatively low, optimizing traffic flow maybe. But it's most needed in situations where the stakes are highest, guiding decisions about global pandemics, economic stability, conflict prevention, things with massive consequences where its reliability is inherently lower.
So how do we navigate that paradox? Just hope for the best.
The proposed solution is a graduated trust model. Essentially, the level of required human oversight increases directly with the stakes of the decision. For low-stakes optimization, maybe EAI runs fairly autonomously. For high-stakes decisions involving complex ethics or potential large-scale harm, multiple layers of human review, validation, and ultimate decision-making authority are absolutely essential. You trust, but you verify, and the level of verification scales with the potential impact.
So looking ahead, the research doesn't just describe EAI. It maps out a potential future, a kind of phased rollout from where we are now to a society deeply integrated with these systems. Let's touch on those implementation timeline highlights.
Right, it paints a picture. In the current state, roughly 2024-2025, we're seeing the beginnings. Basic pattern recognition in specific, narrow fields. But the models still need those big periodic retraining efforts. Causal reasoning is still quite weak, and dealing with inherited bias often requires a lot of manual tweaking and human oversight. We're not really seeing true evolution yet.
Okay, that's now. What about the near term, say 2025 to 2030? What changes?
This is where things start getting more interesting. We should see much better continuous learning algorithms becoming mainstream. Predictive intervention pilots, especially in healthcare, like we discussed, will likely start showing real, measurable benefits, maybe reducing hospital readmissions or catching diseases earlier.
Will it be everywhere by then?
Probably not full EAI. It's computationally very expensive. The prediction is that by 2030, you might see simplified EAI running locally on high-end consumer devices, phones, wearables enabling genuinely useful personalized assistance for complex life decisions like financial planning or health management. But the full power stuff likely still needs dedicated hardware or heavy cloud support.
Then moving into the medium term, maybe 2030 to 2040, what's the big leap there?
Seamless integration. That cross-domain integration layer 4 functioning smoothly becomes much more common, coupled with much more sophisticated causal reasoning abilities. And critically, hardware catches up. The sources suggest basic EAI functions might start appearing on average consumer laptops around 2033, with full EAI capability becoming standard on most new consumer hardware between 2038 and 2040.
So by 2040, EAI assistance is just normal.
That's the projection. It moves from being a niche technology to a commonplace tool used in everyday health decisions, educational pathways, career planning, maybe even relationship coaching.
And the long-term vision, out to 2040, 2060. What does that fully realized EAI society look like?
The vision is one of ubiquitous personalization, a society operating much more in that preventive paradigm we talked about, where many crises, health epidemics, economic downturns, possibly even some social conflicts, are largely avoided because the patterns are detected and addressed extremely early.
Sounds almost utopian.
It has that flavor. It also includes adaptive institutions, governments, corporations, schools that continuously adjust their structures based on EAI feedback,
Yeah.
and even ecosystem-level coordination, using EAI to manage humanity's impact on the environment more intelligently.
And this creates whole new jobs.
Absolutely. The research outlines new roles needed to manage this EAI ecosystem. Things like pattern curators, people whose job is to validate, interpret, and provide context for the complex patterns EAI surfaces. Ethics auditors, specifically trained to monitor EAI systems for emergent biases or unethical consequences. Cross-domain translators who help bridge insights between different specialized EAI modules. And resiliency architects who use EAI's predictive capabilities to design societal systems that are robust against future shocks and failures.
Okay, that future has incredible potential, but it also sounds like it comes with massive risks. Let's talk about those critical risks and how the research suggests mitigating them. First up, inequality and access.
This is maybe the biggest, most immediate social risk. If EAI provides significant advantages in health, education, wealth creation, but only the rich can afford access, it could create unprecedented divides. The source material literally warns of a potential future where the EAI augmented wealthy live 20 or more years longer than everyone else. That's a biological caste system.
Terrifying. So how do you prevent that?
Mitigation strategies have to be built in from the start, treating core EAI capabilities as essential public infrastructure, like roads or the internet, providing universal basic EAI services, basic health monitoring, educational support as a fundamental right, and encouraging robust open-source EAI development to prevent monopolies and keep access broad.
Next, privacy and autonomy. EAI needs so much data, especially for that cross-domain synthesis. How do we avoid a total surveillance state?
It's a huge technical and ethical challenge. EAI's hunger for data is immense. The risk of misuse for surveillance or manipulation is very real. The primary mitigation lies in developing and deploying privacy-preserving architectures.
Like what?
Key techniques mentioned are federated learning, where the AI model trains on data stored locally on your device, and only anonymized aggregated learning updates are shared centrally, not your raw data. And edge computing, processing as much data as possible directly on your local device rather than sending everything to the cloud. These technical safeguards need to be paired with strong legal rights, clear data ownership for individuals, and importantly, a right to opacity, the ability to opt out of certain kinds of monitoring or data sharing without losing access to all beneficial EAI services.
Okay, what about the impact on skills, over-reliance, and de-skilling? If doctors or teachers lean too heavily on EAI, do they forget how to do their jobs?
Another major concern. If EAI becomes a cognitive crutch that's too effective, professionals might lose the fundamental diagnostic skills, the pedagogical intuition, the critical thinking abilities they developed through years of practice. Society could end up dangerously dependent on systems we no longer fully understand how to operate without.
So how do you keep skills sharp?
Strict adherence to the augmentation principle. EAI is a co-pilot, not the pilot. Build in regular unplugged training scenarios where professionals have to rely solely on their own skills. Ensure that human judgment always has the final say in critical decisions. Preserve human expertise, don't automate it into obsolescence.
And finally, the really deep existential and philosophical concerns. If life becomes perfectly optimized by EAI, do we lose something essentially human, meaning free will?
This is the profound, long-term question. If EAI smooths out all the bumps, identifies the optimal path for everything from career choices to relationships, what happens to human struggle, serendipity, the productive failures that often lead to growth and meaning? Does reducing uncertainty also reduce the richness of life? Does diversity of thought and experience wither if everyone follows optimized recommendations?
Does free will even mean anything if an AI can predict your best choice and subtly nudge you towards it?
Exactly. The mitigation here is less technical and more philosophical and societal. We need to consciously preserve space for human choice, even suboptimal human choice. We need to remember that meaning often arises from navigating uncertainty, from striving, from making mistakes and learning from them. EAI should be a tool to expand the range of human possibilities and experiences, not narrow them down onto a single sterile path of perfect efficiency. We need to optimize for human flourishing, not just optimization itself. As we talk through all this potential, the societal changes, the technological power, the research keeps circling back to one fundamental point. The deployment of EAI ultimately highlights that the most critical patterns we need to understand aren't just out there in the economy or the environment. They're the patterns within ourselves. EAI might give us incredibly powerful tools to see those internal patterns with unprecedented clarity. But the responsibility to understand them, to integrate that knowledge, maybe even to change based on it, that remains entirely human.
So EAI becomes a kind of mirror, reflecting our own inner workings back at us. The first pattern mentioned is metacognitive patterns, which is basically understanding how you think.
Exactly. Understanding how you learn best at a really granular level. EAI could potentially track your personal cognitive rhythms. When are you most alert and receptive to new information during the day? Which teaching methods, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, actually stick in your memory? How do specific emotions like stress or excitement tangibly impact your ability to focus and learn?
So it's not just what you learn, but optimizing the process of learning itself.
Right. The EAI tool envisioned here is like a personalized metacognitive coach. It reveals your unique cognitive strengths, weaknesses, and optimal conditions, allowing you, maybe for the first time, to consciously structure your learning and thinking based on your own deep patterns.
Okay, next up, health baseline patterns. Moving beyond those generic health recommendations to truly know your unique normal.
This builds on the predictive health idea. It's about using continuous monitoring not just to catch disease early, but to establish and truly understand your specific baseline ranges for everything. Your personal stress response signature, the precise architecture of your sleep cycles, your individual nutritional needs and responses, not based on population averages, but on your body's data.
So you see exactly how you react to a late night or a certain food or a stressful meeting.
Exactly. It moves health from generic advice to radically personalized, preventative self-knowledge. You see the direct cause and effect within your own system.
Then there's the social dimension, social relationship patterns. This sounds potentially awkward.
Powerful, and yes, potentially sensitive. The idea is EAI could analyze communication patterns, tone, frequency, response times, maybe even biometric feedback during interactions to help you understand your relational dynamics. Which interactions consistently leave you feeling energized versus drained? What are your specific triggers that tend to escalate conflict? How compatible is your communication style with key people in your life?
Like a Fitbit for your social life.
Sort of. It could act as a social pattern analyzer, making these often invisible dynamics visible. The goal isn't to judge, but to provide insights that could help you consciously choose interaction patterns that lead to healthier, more fulfilling relationships. Of course, the ethical guardrails here would need to be incredibly robust.
Absolutely. And finally, maybe the most confronting application, decision-making patterns, understanding your own biases.
This is where the EAI mirror might be hardest to look into. By analyzing thousands of your past choices and their outcomes, EAI could potentially identify your recurring cognitive biases with stark clarity. It can show you, with data, when you consistently make poor judgments. Are you prone to confirmation bias when researching investments? Does anchoring bias affect your negotiations? Are your decisions significantly worse when you're fatigued or emotionally triggered?
It's like having your own personal bias detector running constantly.
Exactly. It shines a bright, objective light on your systematic irrationalities, the predictable ways your own thinking leads you astray. That's radical self-knowledge and potentially a powerful catalyst for change.
So we've journeyed through this concept of evolvable AI, this system designed to perceive, predict, and optimize across virtually every facet of life, from global systems down to our personal health. A system designed to learn, adapt, and even correct its own flaws along the way. It promises a future moving from reactive crisis management to proactive predictive prevention. But the research and our conversation really culminates in a challenging final thought, bringing it right back to you, the listener. If EAI can indeed track and help correct everything from climate patterns to workplace conflicts, and if it can lay bare our own deepest cognitive biases and flawed decision-making patterns, are we, individually and collectively, actually prepared to look at the patterns it reveals about ourselves? And perhaps more importantly, are we ready to embrace the difficult, sometimes painful self-correction that genuine self-knowledge might demand?
Because maybe, at the end of the day, the ultimate, most profound potential of evolvable AI isn't just about optimizing the world around us, but about facilitating a deeper, more objective understanding of ourselves. It's perhaps less about optimization and more about self-knowledge.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
This is DigitView.